My name is Megan, and sometimes it seems like my whole life began not the moment I was born, but when I had to become an adult for two people at once. I was 25 then, and I still believed there would be time for mistakes, for love, for foolishness, but it all ended on one endlessly long day, when the phone rang, cutting through the air, and I heard that Mom and Dad weren't coming back, simply not coming back. One day they were here, laughing, making plans, arguing over trivial things. And the next, all that remained were the clothes in the closets and the scent of Dad's lotion, which lingered in the living room for a long time. Patrick was 15 then, a teenager whose face still showed signs of childhood, but whose eyes already looked with distrust at the world, as if he already knew the world owed him nothing. After the funeral, all the family gathered around the big table and talked for a long time about what to do. Everyone looked sad, but you could tell in every look, no one was going to take on this boy. Aunt Margaret had 3 kids, Uncle John had loans and a bad back, everyone had some good reason, and I just looked at my brother, sitting in the corner with a frozen face, and realized there was no choice, so I became his guardian. I had to grow up again quickly. I worked in a boring office where every day was the same, gray lamplight, endless reports, coffee from a vending machine. The salary barely covered rent and food, but now there were 2 of us. I took all the overtime, agreed to weekend shifts, sold my life so that Patrick could have at least a little bit of a normal childhood. I bought him nice clothes, the sneakers he dreamed of, the newest phones, because I didn't want him to feel inferior to others. Every year I threw him a birthday party, invited his friends, ordered cakes, balloons, music, and every time he smiled, and in those moments, I felt like maybe it wasn't all in vain. I saved every extra dollar to pay for his college. When the time came, I simply paid for everything: tuition, books, housing. I even bought him a car so he wouldn't have to deal with the bus, and I wore old coats, mended sleeves, ate cheap soups, and seemed to have forgotten what a vacation was, all for him, so that he could have the life my parents and I never had a chance to have. After college, Patrick got a job and moved out, but he still couldn't cope. Rent, bills, living expenses, it all ended up being more expensive than he expected, so I continued to help. I sent him money every month. Even when I was struggling, he would call and say, "Megan, you're the best sister in the world, I couldn't do this without you," and I believed, I wanted to believe. And then Gabrielle showed up, beautiful, confident, with a voice that seemed to promise that life would be more interesting with her. They dated for 5 years, and when they announced their engagement, I was happy. I paid for their wedding, $20,000. It was a big, bright ceremony, a full house of guests, laughter, flowers, smiles. I looked at Patrick and thought, now everything is good. After the wedding, I gave them another $30,000 for a down payment on a house, a nice house, in a quiet neighborhood, where the morning begins with the smell of coffee and the sound of the neighbors' lawnmowers. I thought now my brother and I would finally have peace, that we would simply be close, without calculations and obligations. But soon everything began to change, and it began as if imperceptibly, with small things. Gabrielle began coming to my house more and more often. At first, I thought she wanted to be friends, and I even liked it. A young woman, a new family, a shared past through Patrick. We drank tea, laughed, shared recipes, but over time, I began to notice oddities. Every time she came over, she'd ask to borrow something: a bag, a pair of shoes, a sweater. We were the same size, and that apparently made her life easier. She'd smile and say, "May I borrow it, Megan? I have an event, and this thing is just perfect." I'd nod, of course, why be petty? But weeks went by, and the clothes weren't returned. I'd write to her, politely, without reproach. "Hey, did you remember my blouse?" She'd reply lightly, "Oh, yeah, I forgot to bring it next time," or "I think I left it at Mom's, I'll find it and bring it back." But there were no finds or visits with the clothes. Over time, I realized my wardrobe was shrinking. It wasn't that I had luxurious items, but among them were things I'd saved for months, saving up for coffee or new shoes for that one dress that made me look a little younger. Over the past few months, at least 10 items had disappeared, good ones, favorite ones, and every time I opened my closet, I felt as if I was losing not just fabric, but small pieces of my life, which I'd built from trivial things for too long. When I finally decided to talk to her, I was seething inside, but I tried to appear calm on the outside, as if it were a trivial matter. though in reality, irritation had been brewing inside me for a long time, mixed with pain and confusion at how someone could so easily take someone else's things and not return them. She was back at my house, standing in the hallway, running her hand over the new jacket I'd just bought yesterday. Soft leather, a light shade, the last thing I'd allowed myself. After months of saving, I took a deep breath and said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Gabrielle, you still have my blue blouse, and the black pants, and that sweater I lent you in March. I won't give you anything else until you return what you already have." She turned around abruptly, and I immediately saw her cheeks flush, as if I'd hit her with something offensive. "Are you serious?" she asked. "You're so greedy." "I'm not greedy," I replied, and it felt strange to even have to say it out loud. "I'm just asking for my things back." At that moment, Patrick walked into the room, and, as usual, the air seemed to change. Between us stood the shadow of the boy I'd once hugged, promising everything would be okay, and the grown man who had long since stopped needing me. "What's going on?" he asked, looking us both over. "Your sister's making a big deal out of nothing," Gabrielle said, throwing her hands up dramatically. "I borrowed some things, and she's acting like I stole them." "Megan, come on," Patrick said, his voice filled with the gentle irritation people use with stubborn children. "Don't make a scene, just give her the things, you have plenty of clothes." I stood in the middle of the room, clasping my hands, feeling something inside me clench. "She never gives back what I give her," I said. "So what?" he snapped. "You can afford to buy more." I wanted to answer, wanted to tell him how many nights I'd spent at work, how many times I'd denied myself so that everyone around me would have it better, but I said nothing. I simply remained silent, not out of weakness, but because in that moment I realized that any argument with him would hurt more than any silence. After that, I stopped lending Gabrielle money. She kept asking, as if nothing had happened, "Megan, can I have that scarf? It goes so well with my dress." I made up excuses, saying I'd washed it, given it away, lost it. Gradually, she stopped coming, and the house became quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of peace, but of solitude. A little time passed, and I finally had the money to do what I'd dreamed of for years: renovation. I saved every little thing, every change, put aside bonuses, and when the moment came, I felt almost happy. I bought new furniture, beautiful, bright, modern. I bought appliances, a refrigerator, a TV, a stove, everything that made the house cozy, and finally, I changed the locks on the front door. I told myself, now everything is new, now life will be different. The old furniture and appliances were in excellent condition. I always treated things with care because I knew how much work went into every purchase, and I thought Patrick and Gabriel could take advantage of this. They had recently moved in, and their house was still half empty. I called him, smiling, even though he wasn't looking. "Hi," I said, "I just updated my furniture and appliances. Is there anything you need?" "My old couch, the kitchen table, the refrigerator, everything works perfectly. I just wanted to freshen up the house." There was silence on the other end. So long that I almost said it again, thinking the connection had been lost. Then I heard her voice, clear, cold, like metal on glass. "Tell her we don't want her junk." A second later, Patrick answered again, "Sorry, Megan, we're not interested. We have other plans for our house." "Okay," I said quietly, "no problem." I didn't show my offense, but my chest felt heavy, like the air had thickened. I'd simply sold everything cheap, at a garage sale, to neighbors, to people on the street, whoever came along, and I thought, oh well, let this be the beginning of something new. A week later, I returned home from work and immediately felt something was wrong. The lock on the door was broken. I froze in the doorway, my heart pounding in my throat. The door was slightly open, and a chill wafted from within. I slowly pushed it open, and the moment I stepped inside, everything inside me collapsed. The house was empty, not just untidy or upside down, but utterly empty. The furniture, the appliances, the television, even the dishes were gone. Everything I'd saved up for, everything I'd bought just recently, was gone, as if it had never been there. I stood in the middle of the room, feeling dizzy, a chill creeping under my skin. I'd been robbed. Everything I'd been proud of, everything I'd spent years building, was gone in a single day. And then I saw a piece of paper taped to the wall, white, neatly torn from a notebook. I walked closer. I recognized the handwriting immediately, the same one he'd once used to write me Christmas greetings. Megan, it read, "We've moved your furniture and appliances into our home. We need it more than you do. You can buy yourself something later. Thank you, Patrick." I stood there with the note in my hands, my fingers numb, and only then did I hear a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor across the street, as old as the lamps in her living room that I'd seen through the window for years, an elderly woman in her 70s, with eyes that had seen more than she cared to remember, and a voice that always sounded like a whisper of concern. "Megan, are you okay?" she asked, entering the apartment and looking around. "I saw your door was ajar." She entered, looked around, and, like a prop man, exhaled, "Oh my God, everything is lost." I hunched over, showed her the note, and when she read those words, the pulse in her face changed, first surprise, then anger, and I felt the air in the room change. "I saw him this afternoon," she said. "He had a moving truck. He was unloading things from your house." I clutched the note to my chest, and the voice in my ears became alien. "What did he say?" I whispered. "I went over and asked him what he was doing," Mrs. Henderson continued. "He said you told him he had permission to take whatever he wanted, so I didn't think anything of it." "I'm so sorry, Megan, it's not your fault, he lied to you." I looked at her and saw the flash drive trembling in her hands. She went home for a couple of minutes and returned with it, carefully handing it to me. "I have a security camera at home," she said. "It recorded everything. I can provide you with the video if you need it." I took the flash drive, and in that moment, the joy of having at least some proof mingled with a quiet anger. Anger at myself for not having taken care of my own safety sooner, for having listened to someone else's needs more than my own. I had no security system of my own, and now it seemed a foolish luxury, like regretting a missed bus after it had already left. But I had receipts, all the invoices for the new furniture and appliances, the photos I'd taken myself on the day of delivery, the bank statements with all the payments. I could document that this furniture had been purchased for my home, custom made, every chair, every cabinet, with my signature on the order. It wasn't just stuff, it was years of saving. Nights of extra work and self-denial, all for the sake of making this home a place I could breathe. I called Patrick, and he answered on the second ring, his voice somehow cheerful, not the kind needed by someone who'd just been robbed. "Give it back," I said, and there was no pressure in my voice. Only ice. "You stole my furniture and appliances, give it back immediately." "I didn't steal anything," he snapped, his words carrying his usual coldness. "I took a few things you don't need, you can buy more." I felt something tearing inside, but I continued, "Because silence isn't a shield I can afford. You broke the lock, you entered without asking, that's stealing." There was a swaying sound, a noise, and Gabrielle's voice came over the phone, her demanding catchphrase, "Give me the phone." A rustling sound, then her voice, full not of shame but of self-confidence, "You should be ashamed, you have money, we don't, we can barely afford a mortgage, this was our chance to make the house better, you robbed me." I say, "We didn't steal," and listen as she rattles off excuses, and instead of repentance, I hear only the certainty that might makes right is their new religion. "We borrowed money," Gabriel declares, "and you know what? We've already had people come in to remodel the kitchen cabinets to fit our space, so we still can't return them. You have 3 days." I almost laughed at the absurdity. 3 days, as if it were a prank. "Give it all back, or I'll call the police," I said, and hung up. Because hearing more was toxic, she laughed back and said, "You're not calling the police, bro," and hung up. I sat there, shaking, feeling the trust that had held us together all these years melt away. I'd raised Patrick for 17 years, given him everything I had, and now, a price I couldn't fathom. I opened my banking app and found the automatic payment I'd stupidly set up for their mortgage, $1,000 every month, and I'd been paying it for over a year, as if it would be better for everyone. As if money could strengthen a relationship. I canceled the payment immediately, as if it were a small but important note to myself, a response to their insolence. The next morning, I went to see a lawyer. His name was David Chen, and I'd already consulted him on business matters. He always kept things organized, like an accountant of the soul. I told him everything, showed him the note, the flash drive with the video, the photos, the receipts, and the bank statements. David listened attentively, without theatrics, with the business-like composure I desperately needed at that moment. "This is clearly theft," he said at the end, "but let's do it right. First, document it. Take a photo of the broken lock, document every location of your belongings. and make a list of what's missing. Then we'll wait 3 days, as you said. If he doesn't return the property, we'll file a police report." David didn't hesitate a moment. He opened his laptop right there in the office, perched his glasses on the tip of his nose, and, without further ado, typed out a formal letter to Patrick. His fingers glided quickly across the keyboard, as if each phrase were a formula of justice he'd memorized. The letter was clear and matter-of-fact. Patrick was given exactly 3 days to return all the stolen property. Otherwise I had every right to sue. No emotion, no embellishments, just the law, cold-blooded and merciless as a surgeon's knife. We sent the letter by courier because I wanted to be sure it would reach my hands, without a chance of didn't receive or didn't know. I returned home and waited. The day passed in silence. The second day dragged on like syrup. The third, a nerve-wracking wait. No calls, no messages, no apologies, not even a short "we'll think about it" emptiness. On the fourth day, I packed a folder of documents, included copies of receipts, video from Mrs. Henderson's camera, and bank transfer printouts, and went to the police. The station smelled of coffee and paper. I sat across from the officer, a large man with a tired look, and told him everything, starting from the morning I discovered the broken door. He nodded, wrote things down, asked for details. I laid out all the evidence in front of him, and when he finished writing the report, he said calmly, "We'll investigate, ma'am, you did the right thing." A few hours later, as I was sitting at home, trying not to think, the phone rang. I jumped. Patrick's name was on the screen. I picked it up and heard a scream before I even put it to my ear. "What have you done?" he screamed. "The police just arrived at our house. They detained us. They're going to question us." "Are you crazy?" In the background, Gabriel's shriek echoed, "You're ruining our lives." I exhaled. "You had 3 days to return my things," I said quietly. "You decided to ruin everything," he barked. "No, Patrick, you decided to do nothing." He breathed heavily, then his voice grew quieter. "Megan, please, we'll give everything back. Just drop the charges." "No," I said and hung up, feeling something breaking inside me, but it didn't make any sound, like glass under a pillow. An hour later, David called. "The police want you to come. Patrick and Gabriel are at the station. They want to talk to you." We went together. At the station, we were led into a small room with peeling paint on the walls and an old table in the middle. Patrick and Gabriel were already sitting at it, one on each side of the policeman. He looked broken, his eyes were red, his face drawn. Gabriel was crying, but there was no remorse in her tears, only fear. "Megan," Patrick began, "please drop the charges, we'll pay you back today." "You were supposed to pay me back 4 days ago," I replied. Gabrielle looked up, a tear rolling down her cheek. "We made a mistake, Megan, we're so sorry, please don't do this to us." I looked at Patrick. This wasn't a grown man sitting before me, but the boy I'd once held by the hand at our parents' grave, the boy I'd promised I'd never let be abandoned again, and yet, there he was, that same boy, only now his eyes were unfamiliar. "I won't drop the charges," I said calmly. "You'll pay back everything you stole, because the law demands it, but it's over between us. You betrayed me." He bowed his head. Gabrielle sobbed louder, and I stood up. David stood up after him. We left the room, and for the first time in years, I didn't turn around. 2 days later, David called again. His voice was still calm. Patrick and Gabrielle were released on bail. They confessed and struck a deal with the prosecutor. The trial is scheduled for next month. The month passed quickly, but every morning I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, as if I were preparing for an exam I didn't want to take. The trial was simple and matter-of-fact. Videos, receipts, photographs, Mrs. Henderson's testimony. The judge listened silently, without interrupting, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. Patrick and Gabrielle sat next to each other, their faces pale, as if they suddenly realized their lives had become a story to be told to others. The sentence was short: probation, a fine of $1,500 each, and the obligation to immediately return all property and compensate for damage to the house, the lock, the floor, the porch railings. When the judge finished, I felt not joy, but emptiness, so pure it echoed. After the trial, we returned to David's office. I sat down, looked at him, and said, "I need to change my will." He nodded and picked up a notepad. "Everything I own will no longer go to Patrick. I want to cut him out of my inheritance completely. everything will go into a charitable trust after my death. David wrote silently, then looked at me with a hint of sadness in his eyes. I'll prepare the documents and a notice for Patrick. I want him to know, I added, that he is no longer my heir. 2 days after I signed the new will, David informed me that the notice had been sent. It was written clearly and unambiguously. Patrick was no longer entitled to a single dollar, to a single item of my estate. Whatever remains of me will be donated to a charity, somewhere where perhaps someone else, more in need, will be able to better utilize the wealth than the one for whom I once lived half my life. That evening, as darkness fell outside and the city slid toward a peace broken only by the noise of passing cars, I heard a loud, angry knock on the door, not the kind that comes when neighbors drop off with a kind word, or the postman leaves a package, but a knock that always carries anger, resentment, and a desire to punish. I approached the door and, before trying the lock, peered through the peephole. Patrick and Gabriel stood there. Their faces were contorted, from fatigue, anger, perhaps humiliation, but it seemed to me they had come not to ask for forgiveness, but to demand something they believed was still theirs. I opened the door, but left the chain on because I had a gut feeling that nothing good would come from this meeting. "What do you want?" I asked. Patrick stepped closer, his face flushed red. "You changed the will?" he screamed. "Are you serious?" "I'm your family, Megan. Your only family. Everything should have gone to me. You stole from me what was rightfully mine." I grinned, out of exhaustion, not anger. "Stolen? I was the one who said you broke into my house. You took everything that belonged to me. Why would I leave you anything?" He clenched his fists, and his voice wavered, becoming muffled as if underground. "It was a mistake. We already apologized." "No," I said quietly, "you didn't apologize, you just returned the things because the court ordered you to do so." Gabrielle stepped forward, her eyes shining with tears. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling. "We're having a baby, you'll be an aunt, do you even care?" I looked at her and felt something twitch somewhere under her sternum, but then it stopped. "Congratulations," I said, "but that doesn't change anything." Gabrielle flushed like dry grass in the sun. "You're cruel, Megan. You called the police on us, you dragged us to court, you humiliated us, and now you're taking away our inheritance." "It's not your inheritance," I replied, "it's my money, my life, my years. We need this money." Gabrielle screamed, "We can barely cope with the mortgage, the payments, this damn life." "It's not my problem," I said wearily. Patrick lunged for the door, grabbing the handle as if he wanted to hold it open. "Change the will back." "You owe me." "I owe you?" I asked, feeling anger boiling inside me, so old it seemed it had always been there, just quietly dormant until now. "I raised you, Patrick, I paid for your clothes, your food, your college, your car, your wedding, the down payment on the house. 17 years of my life were spent on you, and you still think I owe you more." He pressed his lips together. "You were supposed to take care of me," he said, "that's your job." "My job?" I almost laughed. "My job was to raise you until you were 18, but I continued for another 14 years. I gave you everything I could, and you repaid me by robbing me." "We made one mistake," he muttered. "No," Gabrielle interjected, "you made many mistakes, Megan. You've spent your whole life controlling Patrick, making him into a child." I looked at her coldly. "Gabriel, you never returned a single thing you took. You abandoned my old furniture, and then you stole the new one. You broke into my home, you destroyed my property, and you never apologized, not once." Patrick sighed. "Okay, I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear?" "It's too late," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I have nothing more to say to you. Don't call, don't come. If you keep harassing me, I'll get a court order." I closed the door, slowly, without any sudden movements, as if I were finishing an old letter. They remained behind it, and I heard them knocking for a few more minutes, then shouting something unintelligible, but I didn't answer. Eventually, silence returned. The following week, I called the security system installers. Now there were cameras on every corner of the house, and an alarm protecting the door. I should have done this years ago, then maybe I would have slept better. The furniture, the appliances, everything was returned, as the court ordered. Every object was in its place, just as it had been before. The house looked familiar, cozy, but inside, everything felt foreign. I wandered between the walls, listening to the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, and I realized I no longer felt safe. I had lost my brother, the only family I had left. Sometimes, as I fell asleep, I thought I was too harsh, that I could have been gentler, that I could have forgiven, but then I remembered how I returned home one day and saw the emptiness, a house devoid of a single object. Not a trace of my work, my life. I remembered Patrick's note, scrawled in his sloppy handwriting. "We need you more than you do." I remembered Gabriel's voice, cold and contemptuous. "You should be ashamed." No, I wasn't harsh, I had been too kind for too long. Several weeks passed, everything around me seemed to be settling, the dust of emotions, the hum of memories, the ringing of voices, everything that had recently seemed like thunder gradually became a barely audible background, almost silence. That Saturday, when I finally decided to allow myself the luxury of doing nothing and simply enjoying a cup of coffee on the veranda, the phone rang. The number was familiar, Aunt Mary, my mother's older sister. I already knew what the conversation would be about even before I picked up. Megan, her voice was soft, but it held that motherly admonition you can't escape, even at 42, "I need to talk to you about Patrick." I didn't answer right away, just listened to a seagull screeching somewhere above the street, waiting to see what would happen next. "He and Gabriel came to see me," my aunt said. "They're very upset about what happened between you." "I'm sure they are," I said, feeling the sarcasm break through my fatigue. "He asked me to help him make peace with you," she continued. "He says he wants to apologize properly." I smiled briefly, almost silently. "He's had plenty of chances to apologize, he chose not to." "Megan, he's your brother," my aunt reminded me, as if I could forget. "Family is important, family," I repeated. "You know, he wasn't thinking about family when he broke into my house. He wasn't thinking about family when he stole my things, when he lied." "People make mistakes, Mary, but this isn't a mistake, it's a choice. He chose to rob me, he chose to betray me, he chose to put his own desires above our relationship." My aunt was silent for a long time. I could only hear her breathing on the phone. Then she said quietly, "What do you want me to tell him?" "Tell him I don't want to make peace," I replied calmly. "Tell him I've had enough." I felt the words, spoken aloud, fall off me like a heavy weight. I took care of him for 17 years, I gave everything I had for him, and he didn't even understand the cost. Everything. I'm not going to do this anymore. My aunt sighed. "Okay, I'll tell him," she said, and her voice held more sadness than condemnation. After the call, I sat for a long time, looking out the window. The trees rustled in the wind, a boy with a backpack walked down the road, someone walked a dog. The world moved on, unaware of my losses or my decisions, and I suddenly realized, I was 42, for 17 years, I had lived someone else's life. 17 years I worked, counted, saved, carried everything on my shoulders, and all for Patrick. I had never traveled, I was never married, I hadn't had those carefree evenings when you could just laugh, drink wine, and not worry about making ends meet. I lived as if someone had turned off a light inside me, and I was walking blind. Maybe it was time to change that. I opened my laptop and searched. Tours, vacations, travel, photos appeared on the screen, turquoise water, white sand, women with hats and cocktails, faces that showed no sign of fatigue, Hawaii, the Caribbean, Europe. I didn't know what exactly I was looking for, but I knew one thing. I wanted to be somewhere where no one knew anything about me, where I didn't have to be a sister, a guardian, or responsible. I wanted to just be myself. I chose a resort in Hawaii, 2 weeks, all-inclusive, not to save money, but out of self-respect. I booked the trip without a second thought. For the first time in years, I did something simply because I wanted to, not because I had to. When I told Jessica, my colleague and perhaps the only person who knew everything about me, she almost screamed into the phone. Finally, she said, "You deserve a vacation, Megan. You've worked nonstop for years, helping everyone around you and forgetting about yourself." I smiled. "I know, I think it's time to start living for myself." "What about Patrick?" she asked after a pause. "Nothing," I replied. "I haven't heard anything about him and I don't want to. that chapter of my life is over. That's right, Jessica said, he took advantage of you for too long. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Yes, he did, and I allowed it, because I loved him, because I thought family was those for whom you give everything, even yourself, but now I knew, real family doesn't steal, real family doesn't put themselves above your pain, real family remembers what you've done for them. Patrick was no longer my family, not in the sense I once believed. I stopped sacrificing myself for those who don't appreciate me. I started getting up earlier, making myself breakfast simply because I wanted to start the day beautifully. I ordered flowers delivered to my home simply because I love the scent of lilies. The weeks passed, and life really did begin to feel different, light, almost transparent, like air after rain. I didn't hear from Patrick or Gabrielle, no calls, no messages, no attempts to talk again, complete silence, and silence is a wonderful thing. At first it's frightening, then it heals. The restraining order worked, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe, not from people, but from the past. My security system was now fully installed, every camera focused where it needed to be, no corner of the yard was left unwatched, and even the slightest movement of a tree in the wind would cause the red light to flash, reminding me that I was finally protected. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of the alarm, and for the first time in months, I felt neither anxiety nor fatigue, but that strange, dense sense of peace that only comes to those who have finally stopped expecting a blow. My home felt like my own again, every object in its place, every cup and book where I'd left them, yet everything felt different, as if the walls now knew what I'd been through and had also learned to stand up straight, trusting no one. I went to work as usual, but something inside me had already changed. I stopped taking on extra projects, stopped agreeing to other people's requests out of a sense of duty, stopped being the one who always has my back and will help. My colleagues noticed. One day, as we sat in the office kitchen, Michael said with a grin, "Megan, you seem different lately, happier, maybe." I smiled at him and replied simply, "I'm happier." And it wasn't a pretentious phrase, not a polite facade, but the pure truth. I started doing things I'd never allowed myself before. I joined a book club, even though I'd previously considered it a luxury for those with too much time. I signed up for drawing classes, first out of curiosity, then out of genuine joy. When the brush, trembling in my hand, suddenly drew a line like a sunset, I started having dinner with friends, no longer making excuses like "I need to save money" or "I have to get up early tomorrow." I bought myself clothes, not practical, not drab, but beautiful, expensive ones, the kind that make you walk slower down the street because you enjoy the feel of the fabric moving across your skin. I got a new haircut. For the first time in years I allowed a stylist to do everything my way, and when I saw my reflection, I didn't recognize myself, not because I looked younger, but because I looked alive. I went to the spa, indulged in massages and the aroma of oils, and every time I closed my eyes, I thought, this is probably how it feels to finally stop making excuses for your right to peace. My trip to Hawaii was in a few weeks. I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked forward to something with such excitement. I bought swimsuits, bright, bold, even a little frivolous, and laughed as the saleswoman nodded in admiration. I bought new sundresses, lightweight sandals, a wide-brimmed hat. Everything was planned, and I felt like a schoolgirl allowed to be herself for the first time. But one day my uncle called. My father's older brother, a man with a flat voice and perpetually tired eyes. "Megan," he said, wasting no time on greetings, "I heard what happened with Patrick. He said he wanted me to talk to you." I closed the laptop I was using to research Hawaiian excursions and answered curtly, "I'm not interested." "Just hear me out," he asked. I heard him sigh and knew this would be a long conversation. "He's your brother, Megan," my uncle said. "He's made mistakes, yes, but he's family." "He's a thief," I said. "He broke into my house and took everything I had." "I know," he replied quietly, "it was wrong, but maybe you could give him another chance." I chuckled, though he couldn't see it. "Why? So he could steal from me again? So Gabrielle could take even more of my things and pretend nothing happened?" "No, thank you." "He's having a baby soon," my uncle said, as if the news should soften me. "Don't you want to be a part of your nephew or niece's life?" I paused. Patrick's child, my brother, his future family, blood of my blood, but all I felt wasn't affection, but emptiness. No, I said calmly, I don't want to. This child has two parents, they'll manage on their own, just like I managed when I was raising Patrick alone. You're very cold, Megan, my uncle said after a pause. I'm a realist, I replied. Patrick never appreciated anything I did for him, he just took, until I was left with nothing. I'm tired of being used. He's having financial difficulties, he tried again, they're struggling without your help. Okay, I said, maybe they'll learn to live within their means. I had to let them try, too. After he hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. The coffee on the table had grown cold, and dusk was gathering outside. Everyone seemed to want the same thing, for me to forgive Patrick, my aunt, my uncle, and perhaps other relatives I hadn't heard from yet, but who would surely intervene as soon as the drama began to build. But none of them understood what I'd been through, none of them had stood at the threshold of their home, seeing empty rooms where life had once been. None of them had felt that cold horror when you realize that the person you raised, the one you fed, the one who called you family, had come and taken everything without blinking. They had no right to tell me how I should feel. I stood in the middle of my living room, slowly looking around the house, the very house I'd worked for, saved for, endured, and deprived myself of, the house that had finally become a reflection of everything I'd ever done right, the warmth of the lamps, the smell of fresh paint and polished wood, the clean lines of the new banister on the stairs. Everything was there, and for the first time in years, I felt no trepidation as I closed the door behind me. This house was mine, not ours, not for someone else, but mine. No one would ever enter here again without my permission, not Patrick, not Gabriel, not anyone else who thought they could take what they wanted simply because I'd once forgiven too much. They were gone, and, to be honest, it wasn't just okay, it was a relief, almost physical, like a deep breath after holding it for so long. A few days before our trip to Hawaii, Jessica came over for dinner. I made pasta with white wine and mushrooms, lit candles, poured a glass of good Chardonnay, and at some point, amidst laughter and small talk, she suddenly asked, "Have you heard from Patrick?" "No," I replied, not taking my eyes off the glass, where the light played in the reflections, "and with any luck, I never will." "Do you think he learned his lesson?" she asked cautiously, as if afraid to disturb my composure. I shrugged. "I don't know, and honestly, I don't care, he's not my problem anymore." Jessica nodded, looking at me with that expression people get when they see you truly different for the first time. "You seem peaceful," she said. "Yes," I replied, "for the first time in 17 years, I'm free. I can do whatever I want, spend my money on myself, make choices without thinking about how they'll affect Patrick." "So what are you going to do with all this freedom?" she asked, smiling. I smiled back. "Everything. I'm going to travel, date, try new things. I want to discover who I am, not as Patrick's sister, not as a woman who sacrifices for someone else, but simply as Megan." When she left, I was alone in the house, which was quiet but not empty. I sat on the couch, my thoughts flowing slowly, as if each year I'd lived was flashing before my eyes. All those nights when I'd taken overtime to pay for his tuition, all those weekends when I'd postponed trips because Patrick needed to pay the rent, all those times I'd said no to myself to say yes to him. Suddenly, all of it seemed less like a sacrifice and more like some naive belief that love is an infinite resource. I loved him in a way that perhaps no one ever will. I was his mother, his sister, his rock, and he repaid me by taking everything I'd built over the years. But I wasn't angry anymore. That feeling disappeared, dissolved in some adult understanding that life doesn't always reward kindness, but that doesn't mean you have to stop being kind. It's just that now my kindness will be directed where it's appreciated. I told myself, enough being used, enough putting others before myself, enough living for those who don't see you as a person, only as a resource. Patrick made his choice the day he broke into my house. He chose money over trust, convenience over love, and perhaps that's why I now had the right to choose myself. The trip to Hawaii was like a new chapter. Everything there was bright, as if someone had turned up the light in the world. I woke up early to watch the sun rise over the ocean, read books to the rustling palm trees, and sipped cocktails whose ice rang like the promise of something light, something forgotten. I snorkeled and saw colorful fish underwater, slowly gliding between the corals, and thought that this was it. The moment when I wouldn't need to save anyone, I flew in a helicopter over the island, my heart pounding with delight. Like a little girl's, I ate dishes whose names I could barely pronounce and met people who knew nothing about me, and it was amazing to be just a person, not someone else's role. For the first time in many years, I felt like myself, not a guardian, not an older sister, not a savior, not a woman who had been deceived, but simply Megan, a woman with a future. When I returned home, I felt like everything was still ahead of me. Maybe I'd start dating someone, maybe I'd go to Italy or Norway, maybe I'd finally write a book about what it's like to survive when everything is falling apart. Whatever I did, it would be for me, not for Patrick, not for anyone else. A few months later, I heard from my relatives that Patrick and Gabrielle had a baby girl, small, healthy, with thick hair. They said they were struggling, that they didn't have enough money, that they were barely making ends meet. I listened and felt nothing, no anger, no pity, no guilt. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. And for the first time in years, I could say without hesitation, I was happy, simply happy.